seconds to introduce.
Thanks, Les Cam. Well, Minister, I think we're both former Dublin City Councillors. And you might remember when I led the Rainbow Civic Alliance on Dublin City Council, we abolished bedsits for our senior citizens, and we prescribed a basic apartment, one-bed apartment. And now you seem to be rushing back to an even tinier concept of living, this co-living plan, which I think appeared in Rebuilding Ireland. And I'm asking you basically, what consultations, where did this demand come from? Is it not simply Fine Gael kowtowing to developers?
Minister, 2 minutes.
And thank you, Deputy, for the question. In 2018, I published updated Sustainable Urban Housing Design Standards for New Apartment Guidelines for Planning Authorities under Section 28 of the Planning Act of 2000. And that was to respond, Deputy, to the changing housing needs in light of demographics and the dynamics that we are seeing in the urban employment market. An extensive public consultation process took place prior to finalisation of the guidelines, during which 63 submissions were made to my department, all of which are available on the department's website. My department also hosted a consultative workshop prior to finalising the guidelines. And, Deputy, I don't believe that you made any submission as part of that public consultation, which was very well flagged at the time, because it was very well publicised at the time when it was first announced. The updated guidelines set out the policy in relation to the range of apartment types that are needed to meet the accommodation needs of a variety of household types and sizes. And this includes the introduction of the shared accommodation or co-living format. And this format comprises professionally managed rental accommodation, where individual rooms are rented within an overall development that includes access to shared or communal facilities and amenities. Such developments are only appropriate where responding to an identified urban housing need at particular locations. They're not suitable for families, and they're not envisaged as an alternative or replacement to the more conventional apartment developments which are provided for elsewhere in those same guidelines. And in assessing proposals for shared accommodation, a planning authority must have regard to the need for such a type of accommodation in an area. Planning authorities must also strike a balance between the need for a particular form of accommodation and the need to avoid a proliferation of shared accommodation development to the detriment of the overall objective of providing quality urban apartment development as a viable long-term housing option. And furthermore, there is an obligation on the proposer of a shared accommodation scheme to demonstrate to the planning authority that their proposal is based on an actual accommodation need and to provide a satisfactory evidential base in that regard. I cannot comment on the expected rental price of such developments, as this is dependent on both the market generally as well as the location and accommodation specifics of individual projects. Do they have a gym? Do they have a mover room? Those types of elements. Developments of this kind are not intended to provide state-subsidised housing for individuals or families. They are designed to meet a particular demand which, although limited in scale, does exist in the rental market. And while I am satisfied that the guidelines as issued are robust, given that they are relatively new, and it is a new form of accommodation for this country, though not in other countries, my department will monitor the emerging shared accommodation sector and may issue further additional technical updates to this document as appropriate.
Tommy Broughan, 1 minute.
It's very difficult to understand. I'm looking at, I think Niall Cusson drafted the specific planning policy requirement 8 and requirement 9, and you're talking about single shared accommodation of 12 square metres. Smaller than your own office, double twin 18 square metres. A parking space for somebody with disability, I think, is 17 square metres, and bedrooms of 8 square metres per person. You seem to be on a road to, the kind of capsule living that you have in Japan, in Tokyo, Minister, at the rate you're going. And we've had distinguished economists and students of the housing market, like Mel Reynolds, saying that the very fundamental reason for this is that, of course, is to enrich developers, that 5 co-living bedrooms can fit in a site that's the same size as a typical 2-bedroom apartment. Isn't that the fundamental reason? Now, there was a demand in Dún Laoghaire. There's a demand in my own constituency, a massive demand for houses and apartments, which you're not meeting. You're only going to have maybe 22,000 units coming on stream this year, only 4,000 or 5,000 social housing units. You're not meeting that. So why on earth are we going down this road, Minister? We've had the British housing market. We had the British housing market characterised as shoebox. You're becoming a shoebox.
Minister, Deputy, to respond. He's 1 minute and 1 minute.
Thank you, Deputy, for the supplementary question. When these guidelines were first proposed, you didn't make any observations at the time. Were you not paying attention? Were you paying? Well, I'll look for your submission, Deputy. I'll go back onto the website and I'll look for your submission. No, that's not the same, last Glencore, I'm afraid.
The Minister,
you're a little bit loose now, Deputy.
Deputy Broughan, you will have a second opportunity. Deputy Broughan,
Deputy,
you'll have another opportunity.
What we are trying to do with co-living is to bring another option into our housing market, another choice for young professionals who have looked at this type of accommodation solution in other cities. We want to make sure there's enough choice there so people can have a choice where they live. They don't have that at the moment. And that's the real difficulty that many people are facing in the housing sector today. There isn't choice for how they want to live, where they want to live. There isn't huge demand for this, I'll admit this, but there is some demand. And if we can accommodate 200 to 250 people in new co-living homes over the next 12 months, and that's freeing up other accommodation, other homes or other apartments that people can rent. If between 21 to 23,000 new homes will be built this year, maybe 1%, not even that, might be for co-living. It's meeting some demand, a small demand, but it is a demand that will take pressure off other parts of the market. So that's what we have to look at this in totality. We're not trying to replace social housing with this, not at all. We're not trying to bring back bedsits. We're just trying to bring an option that we know has worked abroad into the Dublin housing market, into the Irish housing
There are other
market.
members waiting.
Well, Minister, I mean, it seems to be, you seem to be offering this to, millennial techie workers and so on, and that this is a kind of an extra provision. But I mean, the reality is that there's an enormous need for one-bed apartments, of a decent-sized two-bed apartments, and so on. And you're simply absolutely not addressing that. I mean, people might say in relation to the high-tech area, for example. I mean, if there is that demand in that area, I mean, why didn't you simply encourage the IT corporations, to buy their own land and build their own employee accommodation? I mean, why should we be taking, if you like, accommodation out of the general mix to try and create, try and meet the housing demand? But, Minister, I mean, all across my constituency, and I think other constituencies, we're getting more and more applications coming forward for studio-type development, studio for bedsit developments. Now, as I said, in the past, both you and I, Dublin City Council, would have opposed this, would have requested that everybody would have at least a decent one-bed apartment, a single citizen living on their own. Now we seem to be going, as I said, in the shoebox direction, and this will be another legacy of this government.
Minister,
Thank you,
final response.
Deputy, one of the primary things that we have tied into all of the plans that we have for building more homes in this country is making sure that we're improving quality, improving standards, improving design. Go to any new build social housing home or apartment and you will see the best type of home that can be built in this country today, as is the case, as it should be. And that wasn't always the way in the past. And yes, it costs a bit of extra money and sometimes it can take more time in the planning. But I think it's important when the state is providing housing for those people who need our help the most that we do it at the best quality possible. We're not talking about social housing here. We are not talking about housing for families. We are talking about providing an option. The state isn't offering this. The state isn't building co-living homes. It's providing an option. And if people want to meet that option, they can meet that option. Again, these were introduced a year ago, and we haven't seen an escalation, a huge explosion in co-living, because there isn't going to be that significant a demand for it that it will take over the market, but there will be some demand. And as we provide for that demand, it will take pressure off other parts of our housing sector. And we have to recognise, even when we look at the demand now, there are so many more people, individuals, looking for their own accommodation if they want that. Again, if they want to live in their own apartment, we need to build that single-bed apartment for them or studio. If they want to live in a shared arrangement, to build a 2- or 3-bed co-living option, or even something beyond that, depending on 6 to 8 people sharing, as per the guidelines that were published.
Deputy
It's about choice.
Deputy Durkan,
Thank you, Mr. Corda. This question seeks to make a comparison between enhanced capital expenditure on local authority housing as compared to annual subvention in terms of HAP or other similar support services to local authorities with a view to achieving the best value for money.